let us move on to the Social Sector Transformation Fund panel. In November 2020, the New South Wales Government rolled out the $50 million Social Sector Transformation Fund program with 3 tranches of grants, primarily in response to COVID-19. It acknowledged, they're like, oh my God, there's a sector out there that can help us. It acknowledged that the sector was hit hard by the pandemic with surges in demand and increased costs. The SSTF has provided a unique insight into the sector and how it's faring through providing a wide range of services and supports. And again, I really feel like this COVID thing is such an opportunity for you guys because the recognition, there is some recognition and support now about the work you do. So today we'll hear from a panel of SSTF support providers from Tranche 3 of the program to share insight stories and strategic lessons from their work in the sector. Our participants today are Stephen Chanphakeo, who is the Director of Strategy, Policy and Commissioning, New South Wales Communities and Justice. John Byrne, Project Manager at SSTF with AbSec. Linda Watson, Director of Learning and Development at the Association of Children's Welfare Agencies. Marcus Harvey, Manager of Digital Transformation Hub with InfoXchange. Geraldine Menere, Head of Not-for-Profit Law at Justice Connect. Joanna Quilty, and CEO of NCOSS. Renee Martin, Head of Engagement from Sefa. And Jessica Ngui, Acting Head of Advisory Services and Program Manager at the Social Impact Hub. And so guys, we do have a fairly big panel, so if you could make your way down and try to limit just to key points would be good.
In the middle.
Last, you get in the middle. And we are going to start with Stephen Chanphakeo. Have I pronounced that correctly?
Close enough. You gave it a good hot go, so that's always good.
Stephen. Chanphakeo.
Chanphakeo, so.
Chanphakeo. Okay. The New South Wales Government contributed around $50 million to supporting community services sectors during the pandemic through this fund. It's the largest single injection into sector capability in recent history. Tell us about the background, how it grew and why it kind of changed focus. What was the DCG worried about and what did they hope this fund would achieve and how?
Thanks for that, Dee. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge I'm on Aboriginal land and also acknowledge Elders past, present and future. And it's been great to hear voices of First Nation peoples on the panel and in the audience today. It's always good to get that perspective. Giving you some background about the SSTF, it's been 2 years when this occurred. So if you cast your mind back to November 2020, we had got out of that first lockdown in Sydney. This was before the bloke was shopping for barbecues, the limousine driver, the Northern Beaches lockdown. We were still wary, we were still trying to work out how to recover from COVID, and that was the genesis for this program, the $50 million. We've been talking to Treasury for a long time about what we can do to support the sector, and the focus in the SSTF was thinking about trying to make a longer term impact, because more money for service delivery is good, but we also wanted to demonstrate to government and to Treasury that an investment in capability building, in looking at how to transform the sector with this investment is a good outcome. And we also heard there were some practical challenges during lockdown, in particular, laptops and access to technologies. How do you deliver services differently in an environment where COVID has exposed the challenges in service delivery? So there was that element as well that we needed to make sure that we could fund the small to medium-sized not-for-profit sector, and really trying to focus on supporting Aboriginal organisations and rural and remote organisations as well. So that was something that we were very conscious on, in that smaller targeted part of the sector didn't have a lot of the resources about thinking about their capability. What is their long-term business strategies? How do they grow and improve their service delivery? So that's the genesis and thinking behind the SSTF. And want to also make it clear that in that context 2 years ago, it was primarily looking at this funding as economic stimulus. We think back 2 years ago, rents were being discounted, completely different where they are now. So we were in government looking at how to stimulate the economy to recover from that very first lockdown. The approach that we took was to use co-design principles in setting up a steerco with peak bodies and other government agencies. It was done within about 3 to 4 months. It wasn't a full co-design process because that would have taken much longer because we had a lot of pressure to get the money out quite quickly to the sector. So we did have a form of co-design where we talked to many different agencies and peak bodies and people in the sector to work out what is the need, what are the outcomes that we want to achieve with this program. And that's how we developed the approach that we took, that we had 3 tranches of funding. The first was to invite eligible DCJ providers to submit a proposal. Then it was opened up to the wider social services and health sector. And what we really want to talk to today about is the third tranche is quite different and new for government, is setting up an advisory service and inviting not-for-profits to provide a consultancy type services for those who got the grants in tranches 1 and 2, but also organisations that weren't able to secure a grant under the SSTF, is to have a panel of organisations that are specialists in what they do, to then provide advisory support on how do you use that money really effectively, because there's no point in investing in lots of IT equipment which becomes obsolete after 5 years and not actually put it within your strategy. So, and that's what's quite pleasing now in having worked with the colleagues on the panel today, is how that advisory panel has developed over time, and the collegiate collaborative approach that has been an outcome of in itself that I think in government we will want to look at more closely, and utilising that experience for future grant programs perhaps. And the last thing I'll probably finish on is in the discussions with Treasury up front, they were very concerned with demonstrating value for money and outcomes. We were able to successfully push out the SSTF program, and we were also able to put out in the, gotta love these names, the Social Sector Support Fund, another $50 million, and it was oversubscribed, and we were able to secure extra $15 million from Treasury. And it informed how we are now doing grants management, particularly in the disaster space, because we've also rolled out grants for New South Wales, Northern Rivers floods, and also for the 13 LGAs of concern during the second lockdown as well. So we've actually learnt a lot through the SSTF, making the grants application process simpler and focusing on what the applicants are actually doing, and not really being too obsessive about counting widgets. So that's a really good, a positive thing that we've been able to demonstrate to Treasury, that we can roll out these funds effectively. And we are now in the process of trying to collect information about outcomes. So I'll leave it.
That's really great news. Is there any sort of mood now for understanding that short-term funds, whilst good, long-term funding would be better, or is that the next step?
Yeah, so DCJ, there's quite a lot of programs. There's 50-odd programs that we run, and a majority of our programs are funded 3 years, and the permanent support program is have a 5-year funding contract. But we do have other programs that are short-term.
Yep.
But there is something we've heard from the sector about longer-term funding, certainly.
Great, excellent. We're going to go to Marcus Harvey next. Marcus, so the SSTF started with a focus on technology, and by tranche 3 had moved to building in a mix of supports, moving to more of an advisory model and supporting organisations to access a range of strategy, business planning, digital capability, workforce training, development and other supports. And that's where our providers here on stage come in. So Marcus, you're from InfoXchange, a not-for-profit social enterprise delivering technology services and supports. You're all about technology for social justice. Given that's how it all began in the SSTF, tell us about what InfoXchange learned about where the sector is in terms of technology. What were some of the insights from the work you did, and what are some of the things we need to know about the fundamentals for getting the digital pieces of the puzzle right?
That's a great and multifaceted
Yes.
question, I've got to say. So I'll hopefully hit most of the marks on there. I think the first thing is the last few years have been really tough, and laptops, while fantastic and essential to enable people to work from home and deliver those critical services to people in need that often don't have other people to help them. And so for our sector to continue to help them, having those basic tools like laptops are really critical. But as much as I love a good laptop, it's a real problem tool because every 3 to 5 years, you've just got to pay for the stupid thing again. It doesn't, it's just an ongoing cost. It's like a frigging car. It's essential, well, maybe not always, but it's not something that really changes something dramatically for the better. And so that's where when we started to get engaged through the SSTF program, we started to ask the question about, all right, so if we've got some core laptops, you've got some internet from home, etc., but let's look beyond the next 3 years, the next 5 years. What is it that's going to be able to really help your organisation make a bigger impact? And the thing I always love, actually reduce your technology cost rather than increase it. And that's really what we always try to look for. How is it that you can work more effectively? How is it that you can actually tell your story in a new and different way, as well as reduce that tech cost? And that's where we've been really lucky to work with so many organisations who otherwise couldn't have afforded other types of services and support that we've been able to do through the program. And so that's about, whether it's building a supporter base, which Dee was talking about earlier, so you can get that 1,000 signatures, and go to your Member of Parliament and say, we really need to do this, through good digital marketing, social media tools. Now, for some organisations, that was their top priority. For others, they've got very old infrastructure and they can't access their information effectively when they're working from home or when they're out with clients. And so helping them move to the cloud, and that will often eliminate a large asset refresh cost, which is always problematic every 5 years or so. And for others, it's talking about how do we capture information and deliver services effectively. So do you need a client and case management system? Do you need a CRM? Depends on what sort of services you do as to what's appropriate. But helping them think through that, as well as what is the story we're trying to tell and what data do we need to tell to articulate that story with numbers in addition to people's stories, because numbers aren't the be-all and end-all. Sorry, love Treasury and economists dearly, but that's not the case. But telling their story in a way with a good system that supports their staff to understand what they need to do has been really critical. And so for us, that's what's been really valuable, is helping organisations move through that journey in the area of technology that's important to them, not just about a piece of hardware. The great thing I found about this panel is that technology doesn't sit in a vacuum, right? If we're working with an organisation and there's challenges within the organisation, whether it be from a workforce perspective, whether it be from a governance perspective, whether it be from a strategy, and oh my God, can you really deliver 18 different service types with 10 staff? That's where we've been really lucky in being able to refer through to others in the panel and then get a number of us working together to support the organisation, because the one thing we don't want is to work on the technology side but then have it all fall apart in sort of 3 years or so because there's other challenges within the organisation. So for me, that was one of the real benefits of the panel. It's that holistic approach, because the other bits of stuff we're not qualified to do well. And so that's really helped us lift the sector beyond what it could have otherwise.
Thank you, Marcus, and that brings us on to John, which I think is will probably raise some really important points, which is that COVID has absolutely fast-forwarded our digital use. But there's so many people for whom it hasn't, because you need decent internet access. And apparently building on copper wires wasn't a genius idea for the NBN. I mean, who knew? Like, except everybody in the country. It also requires a degree of digital literacy that a lot of Australians don't have. It requires access to computers that people simply don't have as well. So in some ways, this digital technology is entrenching disadvantage a little bit as well. And I guess John might talk about Aboriginal community-controlled organisations were a major focus for the fund, and while the funding for hardware systems and digital capability was important, that's not really where the sector capability needs to start. What did AbSec find in your work with all of the kinds of organisations around the state? You've travelled everywhere delivering supports, working with your colleagues to design support packages for Aboriginal services. What are the particular challenges they face?
Thanks, Dee. Some of us weren't at the dinner last night, so for those who weren't, I just want to give my response through song. Not really. So I want to tell you, first of all, I want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land. I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and I want to offer my respect for everyone in this room who works to make this world a better place for all of us. So thank you. I want to tell you a small story. When I was in, this is absolutely true, when I was in primary school, about 11 years old, we had some university students come in and do what I think was a research project. So we had to all sit at our own desks, they took away all of our stuff and they gave us things. They might give someone a piece of card or a piece of paper, they might give someone else some scissors and some sticky tape, various things. Someone else might get crayons, paper, the whole shebang, glue sticks, everything. You weren't allowed to talk to each other, you weren't allowed to talk, you weren't allowed to share, and they did write instructions on the board, but if you asked for clarification, the response was, the instructions are on the board, just read them. After a period of time trying to do something with what you had, they would then take away those things that they'd given you except for what you created. And there was no feedback given, no debrief, no nothing. To this day, I have no idea what they were trying to do and why we were in that situation. And to me, that's such a weird thing because I'm not sure that's ever happened in the past 200 years of our history in Australia to anybody else. Would that be the case? So we've got a huge number of ACOs that we went out and visited and people who contacted us for support. And I have to say, Marcus was absolutely right. Having this board, if you like, or panel has been fantastic because when they've dealt with people, they've brought them to us as well. And it's been just amazing, been fantastic. There are some problems that we saw which were common. The first one was funding. What a surprise. And that was around a number of issues. Number one, the frequency of funding. Number two, the length of that funding. And number three, the type of funding. That hooks into actually the third point I'll make, but we'll come back to that. Or fourth point. The next most common problem that ACOs faced, and I'm sure it's not just ACOs. So previous to my work with AbSec, I was actually CEO of a not-for-profit out in the western suburbs, a non-Indigenous organisation. And we had the same issues. But the issue is one of governance. So when an organisation starts off, I'm going to use the phrase my team member hates, she doesn't believe, she thinks I made it up, but when organisations start, they often start as what's called a kitchen table organisation, right? So they've heard of it too. Anyway, there's normally 1, 2 or 3 people who are passionate about solving a problem in the community. They go out, they run the entire thing, they collect some support in terms of a committee or board, and they're almost rubber stamping what goes on. And it keeps those 3 people so busy, it's crazy. There are ACOs out there who are doing the governance piece beautifully, just fantastic. And there are some who are kind of almost there, and so varying levels, but governance was a big issue. The SSTF allowed us to create some training, which is now online, and if you want to download our app, which gives you access to that, it's free. Our first training is up, there are 3 more to come. First one's about how to hold a board meeting. Good training for your board. Second one's about general responsibilities of board members. Then there's legal responsibilities. And the last one is how to read a financial report, which is crucial for your board members to do because they have to make sure you trade within solvency, right? Not with insolvency, but you know what I mean. Right. So that's funding was a big one. And board was the next one. And then the one that is just so crazy is lateral and external violence. So we've been in communities, and I've been in a community recently where one group won't talk to another group. And there are lots of reasons for that, but part of it is that we are set up to work against each other. Because if their service does too well, it takes away some of our people, or if it does too, it takes away our funding dollars. So I'm not going to talk to them, and I'm not going to help them. We need to stop all that stuff because I think you guys have seen it, and I'm not just the one saying it. If we all work together, we're going to get a whole lot further. The next piece is off-the-shelf or prescribed solutions to unique problems. So I'm sure if you went to your doctor's office with a particular problem and he reached up on the shelf, pulled something down and gave it to you and said, take that, and then you came with a different problem the next week and he reached up, pulled the same thing down and gave it to you, you'd be changing doctors. But what we have been striving to do is find a way to build from the ground up community decision-led solutions that can then have funding applied. At the moment we have, and I have to tell you, at the very beginning, I was saying this to Stephen just the other night, we had a set number of pieces that we were going to do as the work for the SSTF. That has developed over time as we've been out in community, listened and learned what they actually need. And that's modified. We've been able to talk to Stephen and change the way we use the funding to make that work. So that's been a crucial part that who'd have thought you have to actually listen to people to help them, right? Last piece, we saw people spending the majority of time working in the organisation as opposed to working on the organisation. And this is, I'm sure you'll talk about this, Renee. This is so difficult, though. I was talking to a young fella who runs an organisation. I asked him how many hours a week he was working. What do you think? 60? 150. 150. He said to me, I try and remember to eat, I just don't sleep. Wow. But you know what? Is there anyone here who can't say they've put in those midnight hours on a proposal or a submission? Or we've all done it, right? Weekend work, etc. Yeah. So we are so busy trying to make the service run that we don't have time to be strategic about it. And Marcus just explained, it's absolutely crucial. Every decision you make should be based on that strategic future. And if you don't know what that is, we just keep doing the same things we've been doing.
So really then the takeout for that is actually, no matter how busy you are, take time to actually map out your strategy and try it.
And you have to. You have to realise if you got fired tomorrow, they'd have someone in to do your job maybe, week's time. Not irreplaceable. Get someone else doing what you're doing and spend the time.
Yep.
Thanks, Dee.
Excellent. Right, Renee, following on from John's comments, what did you learn through providing strategy and business development support to many NFPs who came forward and from whom didn't? How does an organisation know when it's strategy ready?
Thanks, Dee, and thanks, John, for that beautiful segue, and thanks to AbSec, because I think all of us on the panel need to acknowledge that we were given permission to work with ACOs because of the brokering that AbSec did as the trusted kind of matchmaker between the ACOs and those of us that are non-Aboriginal organisations. Being given permission to walk into that space was really important. That takes time, and we need to acknowledge the time and investment that was put into that. And I also just want to pick up on what you said around having a strong idea at the start about what we were going to do and actually having to step back from that. We were given the opportunity to provide governance, strategy and evaluation services through the SSTF, but we're really open-minded about what that was going to actually mean. And what it meant in reality was that we were oversubscribed with demand from organisations needing help with their theories of change and outcomes measurement frameworks. And that's really first principle stuff. And being able to take the time to distill why you do what you do, and then what outcomes you're going to be holding yourselves to account for, is really foundational work that then unlocks strategic planning, business planning, financial management, et cetera, But asking those questions and setting that framework up as a piece of strategy work can help with that decision-making framework. So then when you get asked to do more, or there's an opportunity, maybe we should merge with an NDIS provider. That could be a revenue-generating opportunity. Actually, is that contributing to the impact and the outcomes that we are wanting to achieve, or is that a bit of a sideshow? Do we have capacity to do it? So there was a lot of kind of investment in really deeply interrogating their own organisations, taking the time to do that. And the CEOs that we were working with and the boards that we were working with were largely from really well-established, long-existing organisations. We didn't get the opportunity to work with many newer organisations. And these CEOs were grappling with lots of change. It wasn't just about COVID. There was changes in demands for funding. There were mergers and acquisitions happening. There's, exploration of new business opportunities. So there was a lot. And so using kind of strategy as an anchor in a change management process was really a great opportunity. And thinking about bringing the team right up from the service delivery providers through to the boards, making sure that there was that consistent understanding of and value across the organisation. We all understand why we do what we do, and we can celebrate achieving that together. None of our projects were delivered according to the timeframes that we thought they were going to be done in. So much upheaval, so much turbulence in the sector. Just having that kind of flexibility. Also the extension from DCJ, this was supposed to just be 1 year. We've been able to extend it to an 18-month opportunity, which is still too short. And we did have to say no to an equal number of organisations that we said yes to. So there's absolute evidence of demand. The intentionality around prioritising ACOs and regional and remote organisations, we fully support. It's a totally underserved part of the sector. And there's absolute need to be intentional about providing support there. We too think that governance is an area that really needs a sharp eye. Good people, volunteering to turn up and attend committee meetings every now and then. We really value and say thank you for that. But sometimes we also need to confront the issue that they're not the right people to be making and stewarding decisions that organisations are facing in really uncertain times. They haven't been given the tools to be able to confidently navigate that, and there just really needs to be some attention on good governance, I think. And so in kind of summary, I just feel like we don't know who missed out. The organisations that we were able to work with self-selected into the opportunity, which we celebrate. We were able to refer across and share and really wrap around those organisations, but we don't know who missed out. But we're pretty confident that there'd be a great pipeline of opportunity because there's a large group of organisations that we didn't reach.
Fantastic, thank you. Now I'm just going to skip over, I will come back to you two in the middle, but I'm going to skip over to Jess Ngui at the moment. The Social Impact Hub also worked with organisations who are ready to do the work of strategic and business planning. We've sort of heard how important that is. You worked with plenty of clients looking to diversify their revenue streams. What are some of the insights you've learned about how to do this? What kinds of strategies and support can help organisations move towards this, and when are they ready?
Thanks, Dee. And firstly, I just want to say thank you for allowing me and the others to be part of this space. It's been a real privilege just to listen. I've been using my ears a lot, as per yesterday's conversation, to really just understand how we can partner and work alongside you. And my colleague Rob and I, we had the privilege of meeting with over 50 organisations as part of our process for understanding your needs around support. And that was really insightful because the majority of organisations that we spoke with talked about needing to diversify revenue. And a small number of those were coming from a very positive lens of seeking out opportunities. What else could we be doing? We see an opportunity to maybe move into a new space. But I'd say the large majority of those conversations were coming from a place of stress and uncertainty and trying to find ways to maintain sustainability and be resilient. So it was, what else can we be doing? Because we are concerned that potentially the funding is not going to continue. So I guess that's the first insight to make. And I suppose where that led to was envisaging that we would undertake a lot of projects where we would look at your business models, your organisations, identify opportunities to offer fee-for-service offerings, maybe look at different philanthropy or grants, and maybe even investment where that would be appropriate. But the reality of what turned out in terms of the projects that we did, and I would say over 70% of the projects we ended up doing were really foundational, or I think the term was made, bases, the first principles. And I think that's really important. Like, it's not what we expected, but I think really important to have those foundations in place. Because those projects were about refreshing your strategic plans, really honing in on the goals and objectives and being clear what is it we're here to do with the limited staff and resources that we have. Being clear how you're going to achieve that, how is that actually contributing to our communities that we are looking to serve, and being able to actually demonstrate and articulate that. And alongside Renee and the Sefa team, a lot of work around theory of change and impact measurement, being able to demonstrate that and talk to your funders and stakeholders about the value. And reflecting, I think, on the last couple of days of conversation, I think that is so important. You will understand the needs of your community, but if you're not able to actually describe that and articulate that in a way that is clear with the solution and the true cost of delivering that solution, and also the cost of not doing that, I think then we're not in a position to change the conversation. And so I suppose the insight in terms of the benefit is we're near the end, we're wrapping up the last few projects, and I'm pleased of the results that we've received back from our clients that we've worked with. Is 88% of the organisations we've served have said they feel better positioned in terms of the support they got from a strategy, governance and demonstrating impact to be more positioned to be more sustainable and resilient and to take that forward. But I just echo the points that have been made. The funding was a great benefit and a boost to be able to provide support to work on the business, not just delivering the day-to-day, but actually thinking about how do we build this capability and the capacity to do it. We need to find ways to find space, funding and time to do that. I think you need that end-to-end view, and I think we need to think about how do we meet organisations at the point where they're ready to take that on as well. And I guess the final point, it's been a privilege to be a part of a panel to be able to provide that wraparound support, and I think equally, I think the conversation has been about how could we all work in more of a collaborative way and less competitive. Think about the number of neighbourhood centres or community legal centres that we supported individually, and I wish I could have my time again to think about how we could pull those organisations together and say, what could we do collectively here? So I think it's been a great privilege and a great start to get some foundations and more to be done, but let's think about how we can do that together.
That's great, Jess. And I think that point about reminding the powers that be of the risk of not using you is really important. And we're going to go to Geraldine Menere now, who's Head of Not-for-Profit Law at Justice Connect. We know that strategy should be led by the board of an organisation. Justice Connect worked with a lot of NFP boards through SSTV, doing governance, health checks, training and support for strategic work. What did you learn about how boards can get set up to be strategic, and what are the challenges boards face?
What did we learn? I think we kind of knew this already, and it's reflected in what everyone has said, that you just have to go back to basics.
Yep.
It's really about good governance. It sets you up for being able to spend that time on other things like strategy and theory of change and also to try and not do those things in crisis. Make sure that you're doing them as BAU, try and set some time aside. It is so foundational and so important. We see a whole spectrum of organisations, that we work with who are either coming to us with really difficult legal issues that they're battling through, or they're trying to do something proactive, like set up a social enterprise. And if you compare and contrast a board with good governance in both of those situations, they will get through that in a much better fashion, and you know, they're so much more resilient and proactive, and they're able to spend that time on those things than a board with, you know, not so great governance. They will get, you know, they will just freeze up and not really be able to do anything in difficult situations. So if you try and put some time aside to, you know, do that as business as usual rather than in crisis point. Everyone's been in that situation where you've been in a workplace and you've been dealing with a tricky staffing issue. You've picked up a bunch of policies that you think are relevant and you realise they're 7 to 10 years old and they really don't reflect the way the organisation operates anymore, and they're kind of useless. So, you know, those sorts of things are important when push comes to shove. And, you know, I acknowledge it's really difficult to find the time to do that work. But I guess the message from, you know, all of the providers on the panel is that foundational stuff is really important. It will carry you through to, you know, the next stage. But also just wanted to give a shout out to all of the volunteer board members, especially those who work on Aboriginal community controlled organisations. They give so much. They sit on other boards. They are representatives for their communities, and, you know, we kind of need to carry everyone together on the journey. I hear what you were saying, Renee, but I suppose I always think that there's, you know, if you can give people that training and that support, then it's about building up. It's about capacity building and giving people the confidence to be able to, you know, make those decisions really clearly and articulate the path that they want to follow. So
maybe some more inexpensive board courses for NFP board members, I think, would be really helpful. So if we get board ready and strategy right, all we need is for our workforce to get on with it. Isn't that right, Linda?
Yep.
ACWA delivered a major program of development support for the community sector workforce under SSTF. With your focus on leadership, tailored development packages and coaching, what did you learn about the sector and what needs to happen to really build the workforce we need?
So I think some of this has already really been touched on today, both in this panel but also in some of the comments and questions from the last interactive session that we had. So we funded quite a bit of coaching into organisations from coaches who work for ACRA as consultants, but also a couple of the peaks, we just gave them money to use in coaching their own members. And I think one of the things we always need to remember is that often, you know, the expertise actually does exist within our own organisations, and or within an organisation that's next to us that is in the same area of work. And I think for the future, what we need to be doing is working together more collaboratively. I think there is still a perception out there that workforce development equals training. And it doesn't. I think training is used as, well, if we just could have some training, we would fix this. Training doesn't actually fix anything. Training only fixes something if, as an organisation, you have the space and the energy and the expertise to then apply that to what is going on. So one of the benefits of this fund has been we've been able to work directly with organisations to get specifically tailored training for their situation and for their context. And that is always going to be much more effective. But there is a lot of talent in our sector. There are a lot of models that we could be using. There are a lot of ways that we could be working together. During a pandemic and a time of crisis, it's often not the time to be doing your training because you don't have time. And our training is often well subscribed but not as well attended because on the day you're supposed to attend training, your work colleague is sick and you have to fill in, and there are no casuals. So you have no option but to go to work. So it's a difficult time to be actually offering traditional training, and so we need to be thinking wider in workforce development. When does training work? When does it not work? What else can we be doing? And I think if, like Jess, if I had my time again, what I would do a little bit differently is think about those wider and more collaborative ways of working and get some tools together so that we could start doing that. I said in the last session that ACWA's working on a child and family workforce skills strategy involving DCJ, AbSec, the ASU, and a lot of our some universities and our sector organisations, and that sense of working together collaboratively to actually build something that's going to work for all of us so that people can move across the sector and through the sector. I think that's the way forward for workforce development, and for too long we've seen it as what training does my staff need, when we actually be thinking about what development as a whole does our sector need, and also what is it in our sector that stops us from accessing that. And it is funding, but there are also some structures and some things that we could be doing differently.
Yeah.
So I think ACWA next year will probably start the year, I haven't told my CEO this yet, but we'll probably start the year with some webinars, some videos, those sorts of things that help organisations to maybe think about their workforce development a little bit differently. And the learning that I've done in this SSTF project will definitely inform those.
Right. So I think if the last couple of years have taught us anything, it's that shit happens and it just sort of seems to keep happening, and you guys are at the forefront of that, and yet you're still being shut out of the planning beforehand. And because we know things are going to keep happening, we know that somehow that's got to change. You have got to be involved in the planning of it. Joanna, could you tell us what needs to happen for that to change, and what did you learn from your work to support community service centre approaches to disaster relief planning?
So yeah, thank you, Dee. I think what we learnt, and it's not going to come as a surprise to anyone in this room, was that our big, clunky, top-down emergency management system doesn't work. It's too slow, it's too cumbersome, it's remote. And what that forced us to do, and SSTF enabled us to do, so thank you, Stephen, was set up our own system, which is what Paul Gray was talking about yesterday, how sometimes we need to set up our own alternative systems. So shout out to our Northern Rivers Floods Working Group, because that's what we brought together, which is the grassroots frontline organisations from across communities in the Northern Rivers dealing with the ongoing impacts of the floods. It's a pretty loose arrangement. We meet once a fortnight. For an hour, there's no terms of reference. It's not a tight membership. Sometimes there's 5, sometimes there might be 20 people online. But what it is about is collaboration. It's about sharing information and supporting each other. But it's also about finding those pressure points and being really focused on the actions that need to happen and then following through on them. And it very much involves NCOSS listening and being the arms and the legs to make sure that things happen, being the conduit into government. So what have we actually achieved? Because I guess that's, the proof is in the pudding. So we very early on said there's this increased demand, we need that flexible funding that was available during COVID, let's ask for that. So we did ask government for that and we got the partnership grants, we're claiming that one, Stephen, which came through really quickly, and it's really flexible funding. We also met with Charles Sturt University because of that shortage of workers up there and not being able to fill vacancies. We got some students placed really quickly out of that. We got a student working with us to do some research relevant to the group. We also met with the police superintendent up there, DV going absolutely through the roof. Some things that the police were doing that weren't helpful. Got the superintendent along, got some good relationships happening and some further discussions going on to make sure that those things don't keep happening. We met with the executive director of DCJ to talk through the fact that there are now, it's a 2-tiered system to get temporary accommodation, and it's leaving some people, really deserving people who are in very precarious situations, in those situations that are unsafe. So DCJ are up for the challenge. they're talking to us about how to fix that. We put the wind up, the PHN. We called them out. We said that their process was overly bureaucratic. They were taking too long to get funding out. They were making organisations jump through hoops when it just wasn't appropriate. So we wrote to the minister. We sent it out far and wide to all the other MPs in the area. And the PHN has the shit. So that has been a lot of fun. The other thing that came out of it was that because I had this link into this really powerful group that's on the ground and is feeding through information to me, when the inquiry into the Northern Rivers floods came out and there was no mention of our sector in there, I did have a meeting already lined up with the advisor to the Premier, who is called the Director of Fiscal and Economic Policy, to talk about our cost of living report. But I threw into the mix that, I wasn't polite. I'm normally very polite. I was so furious. I said, this is just terrible that this sector that has been there on the ground doing such an amazing job does not get a mention in this goddamn report. And he said, oh, maybe you didn't put in a submission. We did the best submission. It was such a good... He looked really nervous and took a lot of notes and said, I will get them to talk to you. And so next thing, I did have a meeting with the people in DPC supporting that inquiry, and they were very apologetic and taking lots of notes, and I just hammered. And then next thing, I got a request, could we please provide advice on the legislation they were drafting about how these things need to be managed better into the future and about where the sector needs to fit into the legislation. So that, we just went hard. We whacked it into the legislation at every possible point. Who knows how that's going to play out, and I do need to follow them up. This is a good reminder that I need to do that. But I think that it's just been this fantastic example of really everything that we talked about yesterday. Setting up alternative systems, collaborating, being really focused and purposeful, following through. Michelle said it's about putting one foot in front of the other and taking those next steps. That's exactly what this group has done in a very grassroots way, and it's delivering results. How much more powerful would it have been if we weren't doing it after the fact, if this was happening before the disaster actually occurred? So, that is our challenge. But we have actually we've used this opportunity to ask for more funding, so that we can build it into the system and get the sector more involved in planning and preparation. And I'm not supposed to say because we're still in negotiations, but I think we have got the funding to do that. So I think some really positive things that have come out of the SSTF. So thank you, Stephen. And that's it from me.
Okay, guys, well, unless anyone's got burning questions, we will have a lunch break, but we're going to have a slightly truncated lunch break. If you can be back in here at 12:50, because we've got a cracker panel on technology.